Have you ever wondered if miracles still exist? This is the story of a Marine veteran, tired, broken, running from the darkness of men who wanted him dead. One night, he and his loyal German shepherd stumbled upon an old stone house buried deep inside a canyon, a house that should have been empty. But when the walls began to breathe, when the ground itself pulsed every 27 seconds like a heartbeat, he realized this wasn't just a house, it was a message from God. What happened inside would change his life, and maybe yours too. If you believe that faith still protects the lost, stay till the end of this story. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to keep these miracles alive. Thank you for being here. May God bless you always. The desert wind of Arizona carried dust and heat even after the sun went down. The air shimmered faintly above the asphalt of the nearly empty highway stretching west of Phoenix, where nightlights faded into the black outline of the mountains. The hum of distant engines echoed through the dry air. The town had long since gone to sleep, but the outskirts, where old motels leaned and streetlights flickered, were still awake with the kind of danger that never slept. Jack Miller, 35, sat in his weathered silver pickup truck parked behind a closed diner. He was a man molded by discipline and haunted by silence. A former Marine, broad-shouldered, his tan skin marked by years under foreign suns, his jaw strong but weary, and a thin scar running from his right temple to his cheek. His dark hair was trimmed short, though the edges were beginning to gray. The world had not been kind to him since he left the service. He carried the quiet edge of someone who had seen too much and spoken too little since. His eyes, steel gray, sharp but tired, watched the parking lot beyond the windshield. In the passenger seat sat Ranger, a 3-year-old German shepherd, large and muscular with a sable coat and intelligent amber eyes that mirrored his master's focus. The dog was trained for search and rescue during Jack's final deployment, but had been discharged with him after a roadside blast injured Jack's leg. The bond between man and dog was wordless, instinctive, built in dust, danger, and survival. Jack had stopped here only to rest, his truck nearly out of gas, his mind drifting through the numb ache of existence. But the night was about to turn. A black SUV rolled into the parking lot across the street, its windows tinted, its headlights dimmed. 3 men stepped out, lean shadows with heavy jackets despite the warm air. The one in front, tall and wiry with slicked-back dark hair and tattooed hands, was Ray Delgado, mid-40s, lieutenant of the Black Serpents, a cartel-like gang known across the border states for gun-running and execution-style retribution. His face was narrow, the kind that smiled without humor, and his reputation made others vanish. They dragged a 4th man from the SUV, a trembling figure in a wrinkled white shirt, blood at the collar, wrists bound. Jack leaned forward, his instincts kicking in. He reached into his glove compartment, pulled out his old phone, a burner, and hit record. Ranger let out a low growl, sensing tension. The argument was muffled by the wind, but Jack caught fragments through the cracked window. Betrayal, shipment, talk of police. Then came the sound, a single gunshot splitting the night. The victim collapsed. Delgado leaned down, spoke something cold and final, and fired again. 2 shots. Silence followed. Jack's pulse pounded. His thumb trembled as he stopped the recording. He knew what he had now. A murder video from one of the most violent gangs in the region. He could turn it in, but he also knew the kind of men the Serpents owned inside the system. Still, Some sense of duty stirred in him, the ghost of his Marine oath. He uploaded the clip through a police evidence portal he remembered from his service days, labeling it anonymous. Then he crushed the SIM card beneath his boot, tossed it into the dumpster, and started the truck. He didn't make it 5 miles before the headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Fast, aggressive, closing in. "Ranger," he muttered, pressing the gas pedal. The dog braced himself against the seat. The SUV behind him swerved, its high beams flashing. Jack's gut twisted. They had found him already. Either someone inside law enforcement had leaked his upload, or their tech people were faster than he'd hoped. The chase tore through the dark stretch of desert highway. Engines roaring, gravel spitting from tires. Jack's pickup shuddered over every bump, the speedometer trembling near its limit. The men behind opened fire. Gunshots cracked, echoing off the canyon walls. Bullets sparked off the truck bed. Ranger barked once, sharp and warning. Jack yanked the wheel hard, veering onto an unmarked dirt road that cut through the desert brush. The path twisted downhill into a dry canyon lined with jagged rock formations. Dust rose behind him in a blinding cloud. His headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness. For a moment, he thought he'd lost them, until the rumble returned, closer than ever. A flare of light reflected off the side mirror. One bullet tore through the back window, showering the cab with glass. Jack gritted his teeth. "Hold on, boy." He killed the headlights and took a hard right into a narrower pass where 2 cliffs nearly met. The truck scraped against stone but forced through. Behind him, the gang's SUV slowed. The opening was too tight. He heard them shouting, engines growling in frustration. When he finally stopped, the world went still except for the engine's tick and Ranger's panting. They were deep inside the canyon now, surrounded by towering walls of red rock. No cell signal, no moonlight, just darkness and the faint smell of rain-soaked earth. Jack stepped out, stretching his bad leg. Ranger followed, ears perked, nose twitching. Then, in the distance, through a thin veil of mist, they saw it. A structure built into the canyon wall, half hidden behind a curtain of vines and dust. Its wooden door, painted faded blue-green, was cracked and warped. Above it hung a weathered wooden sign barely legible in the dark. Grace Hollow. Jack approached carefully, sweeping his flashlight over the surface. The stone walls of the house seemed to breathe faintly, as though exhaling the cool air from within. The doorknob turned without resistance. Inside, the smell of old smoke and stone filled the air. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. The interior was bare. A table, 2 chairs, a hearth, blackened by time. Yet something about it felt alive. The temperature was oddly warm, though no fire burned. Ranger walked a slow circle, then sat, tail thumping once against the floor, as if to say this place was safe. Jack lowered himself onto one of the chairs, his body trembling from exhaustion. He glanced at the stone wall beside him and froze. The surface seemed to pulse, just faintly, in rhythm, like a heartbeat buried deep inside the rock. He exhaled slowly, unsure whether it was exhaustion or something more. Outside, the wind shifted, sealing the entrance with a soft sigh of dust. The canyon grew silent again, save for the distant echo of angry engines fading away. Jack leaned down, resting his hand on Ranger's head. "We'll stay here tonight, buddy," he murmured. "Just for tonight." The dog's amber eyes flicked toward the hearth, then back to him, calm and unafraid. The faint warmth from the walls spread slowly through the room like a living breath. For the first time in years, Jack Miller, Marine, survivor, runaway witness, felt something he hadn't known in a long while. Peace. And somewhere deep within Grace Hollow, something ancient and unseen seemed to whisper back. The morning came thin and gray, seeping through the cracks of the boarded window like a secret too faint to tell. The desert had gone quiet, except for the hush of wind sliding through the canyon. Jack Miller woke with a start, the faint tremor under the stone floor still there, steady, rhythmic, every 27 seconds, like the slow beat of a sleeping heart. Ranger, the German shepherd, lay curled beside the hearth, his ears twitching with every pulse. The dog's fur shimmered in the pale light, and his breathing matched the faint hum beneath the ground, as if the house itself had lulled him into its rhythm. Jack rubbed his temples and looked around the single room. The faint scent of burnt wood and damp stone clung to everything. The place hadn't been touched in years, maybe decades, yet it felt lived in, protected, preserved. On the mantel above the hearth, he noticed a photograph framed in tarnished brass. A man in his 60s, tall, with weather-beaten features, standing beside a glimmering stream that looked too blue to be real. On the back of the photo, in faded cursive, it read, "This place remembers kindness." Jack traced the words with his thumb, feeling a warmth that didn't come from the fire. He turned toward the small window to check outside. The glass was clouded, the condensation thick like breath. As he wiped it with his sleeve, faint letters began to appear on the surface, letters forming themselves from inside the mist. 3 words emerged, shaky yet clear. "You are safe." His breath caught. For a long moment, neither he nor Ranger moved. Then the words slowly faded, dissolving back into glass. Jack let out a strained laugh. "I'm talking to windows now," he muttered, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. Ranger tilted his head as if questioning his sanity. "Don't look at me like that," Jack added, half smiling, but the smile didn't last. Outside, a faint echo of engines rolled through the canyon. Ranger stiffened, growling low. Jack quickly doused the remnants of the fire and moved to the door. He cracked it open just enough to peer outside. The sun had barely climbed over the ridge, the canyon painted in cold hues of blue and gold. A faint shimmer, dust kicked up from tires, floated near the canyon's mouth. They had come back. Jack shut the door quietly and fastened the latch. He pulled the heavy curtains closed and whispered, "Stay close." The hum beneath the floor deepened. Ranger's growl faded into a cautious whine, as though something unseen was calming him. The sound of footsteps reached the outer rocks. The men spoke in low tones, their words bouncing off the canyon walls. Jack recognized one of the voices. Ray Delgado, the lieutenant of the Black Serpents, the man who'd pulled the trigger the night before. Another voice joined him, unfamiliar but harsh, belonging to Cole Anders, a new addition to the gang. Anders was younger, maybe late 20s, with a deep southern accent and a habit of spitting between sentences. He'd grown up on violence, molded by a father who'd run drugs across the border and left him for dead after a deal went wrong. The bitterness never left his eyes, and his loyalty was to money, not men. Jack could make out fragments of their conversation. "He couldn't have gone far," Anders said. "Tracks end here. Signal 2. Delgado cursed softly, his patience thin. "Find him. The boss wants the tape buried." The men fanned out. One of them tapped on a metal detector, but the signal buzzed and died. "Device is fried again," Anders muttered. Delgado kicked a rock. "Then we search old school." Jack felt the house tremble slightly, not from footsteps, but from something deeper, like an awakening. He could hear faint whispers, soft as breath against the back of his neck. Ranger pressed close to him, hackles raised but no longer growling. The temperature in the room rose, and from the cracks in the floor, a faint blue glow bled upward, tracing the stone seams like veins of light. Outside, the men cursed again. The air thickened with mist, unnatural and sudden, drifting from nowhere. The fog swallowed their outlines, bent their flashlights into useless orbs. Delgado shouted, "Fall back! Visibility's gone!" Through the window, Jack saw their silhouettes dissolve into the fog, stumbling away, voices panicked. One of them tripped and fired his gun into the air. The echo crashed against the canyon walls and then vanished entirely. Silence followed, heavy, total. Inside, the glow dimmed, the warmth lingered, almost comforting. Jack crouched beside Ranger, who now rested his head calmly on his paws, eyes still alert. "You felt that too, didn't you?" Jack whispered. The dog's tail thumped once in answer. He looked around again, the weight of the strange house pressing on him. Not menacing, but purposeful. Everything here seemed deliberate. The warmth, the light, the words on the glass. He felt as if the place had chosen him, as though it understood what he was running from. He returned to the hearth and studied the photo again. The man in it stood beside a creek under a sky that looked like twilight. In the distance of that image, a shape barely visible. A house built of stone, half buried, almost exactly like Grace Hollow. Jack turned the picture over and whispered, "What are you?" The hum beneath the floor answered in rhythm, deep and slow, like something breathing below the earth. Outside, the last trace of fog lifted from the canyon. The wind shifted direction, carrying dust away from the mouth of the hollow. For now they were hidden. For now they were safe. But deep down, Jack knew this was no coincidence. Grace Hollow wasn't just shelter. It was watching. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Delgado and Anders swore they'd come back. The morning sun broke gently over the canyon, painting the cliffs in shades of copper and gold. The storm of the night before had washed the air clean, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Jack Miller could see the full stretch of Grace Hollow in daylight, a narrow ravine opening toward the east, hemmed in by steep red rock walls and scattered brush. The house looked even older under sunlight, its stones the color of ancient bone, the faded blue-green door scarred by weather. It didn't seem abandoned. It seemed patient. The rhythmic hum beneath the floor had softened overnight, but it was still there, like a heart continuing its quiet vigil. Jack was on the porch when he heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel. Ranger, his German shepherd, barked once before lowering his ears, alert but not hostile. A white government-issued Jeep rolled slowly into view, stopping just short of the house. A woman stepped out, her movements deliberate, cautious. She was Grace Turner, a park ranger in her mid-30s, tall and lean, her tan uniform dusted with the pale grit of desert roads. Her hair, the color of sun-browned wheat, was tied in a practical braid that reached the middle of her back. She had a square jaw, a small scar beneath her left ear, and eyes of clear green that missed little. The job had carved her into someone both grounded and brave. Her posture carried that blend of compassion and steel that came from years of finding lost hikers and facing off against poachers in remote canyons. "Morning," she said, resting one hand on her belt where a radio and sidearm hung. "You picked an odd place to camp." Jack straightened, feeling the familiar defensive instinct rise. Truck broke down, he replied. We'll move on soon. Grace's gaze flicked to the old tire tracks that led to the porch. Those aren't your tracks. I saw 3 sets this morning down by the ridge. Black SUV, heavy treads, stopped not far from here. Jack's jaw tensed. They didn't look friendly? Not the kind that bring flowers, she said dryly. Then, seeing the stiffness in his stance, she added, You in some kind of trouble, mister? He hesitated. Lying had kept him alive so far, but something in her tone, the calm authority, the lack of judgment, made him drop the pretense. I saw something I shouldn't have, he said quietly. Something the wrong people don't want anyone talking about. Grace studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded toward Ranger, who sat beside Jack like a living sentinel. And I'm guessing that's your backup? Ranger, Jack said. 3 years old, smarter than most people I know. Grace crouched slightly, keeping her movements open, and extended a gloved hand. Ranger sniffed, then gave a soft chuff, accepting her. Good dog, she murmured. When she looked up again, her eyes were sharp. There's been chatter on the Ranger frequency about the black serpents. Locals say they're pushing deeper into the hills. You might have wandered into their hunting ground. Jack swallowed hard. I didn't wander. Her expression softened slightly. Then you should know they don't quit easy. She pulled a small radio from her belt and adjusted the dial. Here, she said, handing him a slip of paper. That's a private channel. Use it if you need help. Ask for Inspector Laura Bennett. She's running a joint task force out of Phoenix. If what you've got is evidence, she's the one who'll keep it from disappearing. Jack took the note, tucking it into his pocket. You trust her? She's the kind who doesn't scare easy, Grace replied. And that's rare these days. Before she left, she paused on the porch, glancing back at the house. You know this place doesn't show up on any maps, right? Jack shook his head. I figured as much. Well, she said with a faint, thoughtful smile. Some places hide people for a reason. By dusk, the serenity of the canyon was gone. The hum beneath the stone floor began to deepen again, a slow vibration that seemed to resonate in Jack's ribs. He turned off the lantern and covered the windows with heavy cloth. Outside, the faint glimmer of headlights flickered against the canyon walls. They were back, the black serpents. More of them this time. Ranger pressed against the door, silent but bristling. Jack crouched beside him, hand steadying the rifle he'd kept from his service days. Through the crack in the curtain, he saw figures moving, 3, maybe 4, spreading out across the canyon floor. One of them tossed something metallic. A flare ignited, flooding the rocks in harsh orange light. Jack froze as the light neared the window, but then something miraculous happened. The glass began to fog from within, not from heat, but from cold. A thin frost spread across the pane, dimming the reflection. The orange glare faded into a soft, muted blue. Outside, the men shouted in confusion. The flare sputtered once and then flickered out, smoke curling upward like surrender. The hum inside the house swelled. From a crack near the hearth, a faint glow seeped out, blue and warm at once. Moisture condensed there, dripping in slow, rhythmic beats. Jack reached out, touching one drop with his fingertips. It was warm, not wet. A strange calm washed over him, the kind that came not from courage but from something deeper, older. Ranger relaxed, lying down, no longer trembling. Outside, the men regrouped. One threw another flare, but a gust of wind rose from nowhere, tossing it backward into the rocks. The canyon seemed to breathe, and a deep tone, low, resonant, rolled through the air. It wasn't thunder. It was the house itself. Within minutes, the serpents retreated, their shouts fading into the distance. Jack sank against the wall, chest rising with disbelief and awe. The glow near the hearth pulsed once, then dimmed. Grace Hollow was silent again, but it no longer felt empty. Jack looked at Ranger and whispered, "I think it wants us to live." The canyon was still damp from the night rain when Grace Turner returned to Grace Hollow at dawn. Her Jeep's tires crunched against the gravel, echoing off the narrow walls. Jack Miller was already waiting by the porch, dressed in a faded green jacket and worn boots, the look of a man who hadn't slept, but whose mind had settled on something final. Ranger, the German shepherd, sat beside him, his sable coat glinting faintly under the early light. The dog's ears twitched at every distant sound, but his eyes stayed on Grace as she approached. "You're really doing this?" she asked, shutting off the engine. Jack nodded. "I can't keep running. They'll never stop unless the truth hits daylight." Grace studied his face, sunburned, rough around the edges, the kind of weariness only men who had seen too many deserts carried. "Then we do it right," she said, tightening her braid. "There's a trail west of here. Not on the maps. It'll take us to a ridge where I can send a signal to Inspector Laura Bennett in Phoenix. She's already standing by." Jack gave a short nod, his hand resting on Ranger's head. "Let's move before the serpents smell us again." They started at first light. The narrow trail wound through crimson cliffs, lined with sagebrush and brittle pine, until the canyon opened into a flat stretch of plateau that shimmered under the rising sun. Grace led the way, her rifle strapped over her shoulder, moving with the sure-footedness of someone who knew every ridge and echo in these mountains. Jack followed close, Ranger trotting between them, occasionally stopping to scent the air. Halfway up the ridge, Grace stopped and pulled out a handheld transceiver, small, matte black, covered in scratches. "This was custom modified by a friend in the Forestry Service," she said. "Encrypted frequency, military-grade scrambler. It'll patch the video directly to Bennett's task force." Jack handed her the memory stick, a battered silver drive with tape over the edges. His fingers lingered as if letting go meant something larger than the evidence itself. Grace slid it into the port and began transmitting. The red light blinked steadily, but before she could say a word, Ranger's low growl broke the silence. He had frozen, head lifted toward the ridge above. Jack followed his gaze. Shadows moved, 3, 4, then more, silhouettes against the morning sky. "Down!" Grace hissed, yanking Jack behind a boulder. Gunfire cracked through the still air. Dust and stone exploded around them. The transmission device clattered to the ground, still blinking. From the ridge above, Grant Viper Ellison appeared, a tall, powerfully built man in his 40s with cropped black hair, a stubble beard, and a jagged scar across his neck that looked like an unfinished noose. His eyes were pale gray, sharp and cold. Once a Special Forces dropout, Viper had turned mercenary before joining the Black Serpents, rising through brutality and fear. His voice carried a rough, gravelly rasp, the kind of tone born from too many cigarettes and too little conscience. "End of the line, Marine," Viper called out, stepping to the edge. "You should have known not to stick your nose where you sleep." Jack rose from behind the rock, rifle steady. "I've seen your kind before, Ellison. You always think the gun makes you untouchable." Viper smiled, cruel and amused. "Guns don't make me untouchable, Miller. Fear does." He flicked his wrist. 2 men flanked down the slope, firing, Grace returned fire, sharp and precise, clipping one in the leg. Ranger launched forward before Jack could stop him, sprinting across the rocks with a snarl. The dog leapt high, teeth flashing, and clamped down on a gunman's wrist, wrenching the weapon free. Jack took the opening, charging forward. He met the second man mid-swing, twisting his arm and driving him hard into the ground, a motion trained from years of close combat. The man hit the dirt and didn't get up. Viper fired twice. The bullets ricocheted off stone, missing by inches. Jack rolled, took aim, and fired back, grazing Viper's shoulder. The gang leader cursed, clutching his arm, fury flaring in his pale eyes. Then the earth itself began to tremble. A deep vibration pulsed through the canyon, the unmistakable 27-beat rhythm Jack had felt beneath Grace Hollow's floor. Dust fell from the cliffs. Ranger whined once, but didn't retreat, his gaze fixed on the swirling dust forming around them. "What the hell?" Grace began, but stopped when she saw it too. The air shimmered like heat haze, and a column of wind rose between them and the serpents. It wasn't violent, but dense, almost solid. Viper's men staggered, unable to steady their aim. The hum grew louder, echoing through the ground. Jack realized it wasn't the wind at all. It was Grace Hollow answering, its pulse reaching them from beneath the canyon. The ridge split slightly, stone groaning. The gusts whipped sand into the attackers' faces, disorienting them. One screamed as his rifle was torn from his hands and hurled into the dust. Viper stumbled back, shouting orders drowned by the rising roar. Then, faint but clear, the sound of sirens echoed across the canyon. Grace looked down at the transceiver still blinking red on the rock. The transmission had gone through. Within minutes, black SUVs with sheriff markings rolled in from the Western Pass. Inspector Laura Bennett herself stepped out. Mid-40s, composed, with short auburn hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore a tan field jacket, the kind that spoke of authority without arrogance. A woman shaped by justice. Her face carried faint lines of fatigue earned from fighting corruption head-on. "Drop your weapons!" she shouted through a megaphone. Viper glared at Jack, rage and disbelief mixing in his face. "You think this is over?" Jack lowered his rifle. "It is for you." The agents swarmed. Within minutes, the serpents were on their knees, handcuffed. Ranger stood in front of Jack, chest heaving, eyes still fixed on Viper like a guardian unwilling to rest. When the dust finally settled, Grace glanced at Jack. "You okay?" He exhaled slowly. "Ask me when it's quiet again." They rode back toward Grace Hollow as twilight fell. When Jack reached the porch, the window had fogged again, faint letters shimmering through the mist. "I kept you." He touched the glass and whispered, "Yeah, you did." The following weeks unfolded in a quiet rhythm, like the canyon itself had chosen to breathe slower now that the storm had passed. Jack Miller stood at the edge of the ridge one morning, watching sunlight slide down the red stone walls. The world felt heavier in its stillness, but not in a burdensome way, more like a weight that grounded him. Below, Grace Hollow shimmered faintly, its stone surface warmed by the early light. It looked ancient and unshaken, as if time itself respected the boundaries of that small valley. The case against the Black Serpents had gone to trial quickly. Grant Viper Ellison and his men faced a long list of charges: murder, trafficking, obstruction. Inspector Laura Bennett, true to her reputation, built an airtight case. She visited Jack once more before leaving for Phoenix, a tall woman whose posture radiated calm control. Without the tension of the chase, Her face had softened a little, revealing the quiet kindness behind her stern eyes. "You did good, Marine," she had told him. "You gave the right people a reason to believe again." Jack had thanked her, but his voice cracked slightly when he asked about relocation. Bennett smiled faintly. "You're cleared for witness protection if you want it," she said. "New name, new city, no more ghosts." Jack shook his head. "I've had enough running. I'll stay here. There's work to do." Now, that work was beginning to take shape. Grace Turner had pulled some strings with the forestry department, convincing her supervisors that Grace Hollow was more than an abandoned property. It was a natural preserve worth protecting. Her boss, Deputy Ranger Samuel Pike, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a weathered face and sun-bleached mustache, had come down himself to inspect. His voice carried the easy drawl of someone who had spent more years outdoors than under a roof. "Place has got a spirit to it," he said, squinting toward the canyon mouth. "Can't say I understand it, but I respect it. You two did good keeping it from turning into another gunfight headline." Grace smirked slightly. "It did most of the work itself," she said, glancing toward the hollow. Pike raised an eyebrow but didn't press. He'd learned long ago not to question miracles when they left people breathing. He stamped the paperwork with a heavy hand. "Grace Hollow," he read aloud, "registered as a protected heritage site. Off limits without state authorization." Then, looking at Jack, he added, "You staying on as auxiliary ranger? Grace could use another set of eyes." Jack nodded. "As long as I can help keep this place safe." Pike clapped him on the shoulder, his palm rough and reassuring. "Good. Forest's big, but good people are scarce." He left in his jeep, dust trailing behind him like a slow farewell. That afternoon, Jack walked back to the house with Ranger trotting beside him. The dog had grown calmer since the night of the fight. His fur caught the light with silver streaks now, and the faint scar on his shoulder, earned from a piece of flying debris during the chase, was a small badge of survival. When he wasn't shadowing Jack's every move, he'd lay near the hearth, occasionally twitching his ears as if still hearing the hum of the stone beneath them. Inside the cabin, Jack spent the rest of the day repairing what time and chaos had broken. He replaced the cracked window with salvaged glass, tightened the hinges on the door, and scrubbed soot from the fireplace. Every hammer strike echoed softly, blending into the faint pulse of the house. The rhythm was still there, steady, 27 beats at a time, like a quiet promise whispered through the earth. Grace arrived near dusk, her uniform dusted with red earth. "You really can't sit still, can you?" she said with a teasing smile. "Old habits," Jack replied, wiping sweat from his brow. She stepped inside, looking around. "You've made it livable again." "It was already alive," he said. "I'm just listening to it." Grace paused, her eyes catching the soft glow under the hearth, where the faintest blue hue pulsed between the cracks. "You ever wonder what it really is?" Jack shrugged, leaning against the mantel. "Maybe it's not meant to be explained. Some things heal what people break. Doesn't matter how." Grace smiled faintly, the kind that carried gratitude more than joy. "You sound like a man who's finally stopped fighting everything." "Maybe I'm just learning how to belong somewhere," Jack said. As the sun sank below the ridge, its last light poured through the window, setting the dust motes ablaze in gold. Jack reached up and hung the old photograph he'd kept since the first night. The picture of the former owner standing by the lake, smiling beneath an endless sky. Beneath it, he carved 4 words into the wooden mantel. "It remembers kindness." Ranger settled by the hearth, his tail thumping once before he lay still. The hum in the floor matched the beat of his breathing. Grace watched in silence as the air filled with a calm neither of them dared disturb. Outside, the sky turned from gold to crimson to deep indigo. The canyon glowed faintly, the blue veins beneath the stone flickering like the pulse of a sleeping giant. Jack stepped onto the porch, looking out over the valley. "It's strange," he said quietly. "I thought I'd lost everything. But maybe it's the other way around." Grace stood beside him, her voice low. "You mean this place found you?" Jack nodded. "It's not ours to own. We belong to it." And as night fell, Grace Hollow answered, not with thunder or light, but with the softest hum of peace, steady as the breath of the earth. In the stillness of the canyon, we are reminded that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or fire. They often come softly, in the quiet places where faith takes root. Grace Hollow was more than stone and earth. It was a whisper from God, a reminder that even the broken can be healed, and that sometimes protection doesn't wear a uniform. It flows from grace itself. Like Jack, we all carry battles unseen, fears, regrets, moments when we've lost our way. But when we stop running, when we listen closely, we may find that God has already built us a shelter, a place of peace waiting within our own hearts. So if this story touched you, take a moment to believe again, in kindness, in second chances, in the quiet miracles around you. Because sometimes, what saves us isn't strength or luck, it's love and the unseen hand that guides us home. May God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are. If you felt the warmth of this story, please like, share, and leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story of hope and faith. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of the light that still lives in the world. May grace find you, just as it found them.